Pour moi de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour cette première conférence de DIGNA. C'est le Centre d'expertise canadien pour la prévention de l'exploitation et des abus sexuels. My name is Nicholas Moyer. It's a pleasure to welcome you today for this first conference of DIGNA, the Canadian Centre of Expertise for the Prevention of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. Et avant de dire autre chose, il est important pour moi d'assurer que vous compreniez ce que disent les gens dans cet événement. Et donc, c'est une session entièrement bilingue avec traduction simultanée pour toutes les sessions. Alors, prenez un moment pour trouver les boutons d'interprétation sur votre écran. Choisissez la langue de votre choix. Pensez à éliminer aussi l'audio original pour mieux entendre. Vous aurez besoin de la version la plus récente de Zoom si ce n'est pas le cas pour que ça fonctionne. So I'll say that in English as well. This is an entirely bilingual event. And so before anything else, it's important to make sure you understand what people are saying and that you take a moment to ensure that interpretation is working for you. If you need it, do use the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, choose the language of your choice, and consider muting the original audio for a better listening experience. Of course, you'll require the most recent version of Zoom, so hopefully you do have that, and if not, encourage you to update it quickly. J'espère que vous êtes bien accordés maintenant pour l'interprétation parce que je vais bientôt arrêter de me répéter en français et en anglais. Je prends aussi ce moment pour bien sûr saluer et avec grand respect nos traducteurs, traductrices qui sont là pour nous tous aujourd'hui. I hope you're all getting properly set up because I do warn you, this is the last time I repeat myself in both French and English. I do want to, of course, take a moment as well to just thank our interpreters who do really the amazing work of making sure that we can communicate together in both of Canada's official languages. I also want to warn you that today's session will cover topics of sexual exploitation, abuse, and violence, and it may be difficult to listen to. So anyone should feel free to excuse themselves at any time. We have provided a document with details on the dedicated counseling that's available if anyone does wish to use the service. You'll find that shared in the chat now or briefly. While we will not be sharing personal experiences directly, we do recognize that everyone comes here with their own stories and that this topic can be triggering. So please do know that what you need to do to prioritize self-care and of course to use the resources that are made available to you today free of charge. Maintenant, que je sais que vous pouvez tous me suivre dans la langue de votre choix, je veux prendre un moment essentiel, comme toujours au début de nos événements, pour reconnaître que je vous joins de la ville d'Ottawa, qui est située sur le territoire non cédé des tribus algonquines, Anishinaabe et Huron-Wendat. Dans une conférence qui est entièrement virtuelle, nous participons tous de nombreuses régions du pays, du Canada et du monde entier. J'espère que vous connaissez les peuples d'origine où vous êtes, c'est important. La reconnaissance des peuples d'origine sur les terres où nous nous retrouvons doit nous imposer forcément une réflexion sur les privilèges dont nous bénéficions aujourd'hui, à la suite d'une longue histoire de colonialisme. Cette reconnaissance sert à la fois à nous rappeler les contributions de ceux qui nous ont précédés et aussi de l'importance de travailler quotidiennement sur la réconciliation, sur le dialogue et le rapprochement des peuples. If you belong like me to the settler peoples who benefit from the privileges of colonialism, then I hope this land acknowledgement can serve both as a moment of respect to our First Nations, on whose land we live and work, as well as a moment of reflective discomfort. We can take this moment to recognize, among other things, Canada's appalling record in actually addressing the abuse and exploitation of Indigenous women and girls across Turtle Island. Canadian efforts towards the protection against sexual exploitation and abuse, PSEA, we'll use that acronym a lot today, PSEA must rest upon solid progress towards addressing the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and requires that all agencies also do their own organizational decolonization work as well. We can see parallels between the international cooperation sector's work on PSEA globally and the need to address the harm caused by various entities involved in residential schools in the 60s scoop and other historic and present-day infringements on the rights of Indigenous peoples. Where we know sexual abuse has occurred at the hands of those claiming to help, we must all commit at home and abroad to do better. And while the topic of privilege is on my mind, it's also critical for me to speak to and share Cooperation Canada's support for the anti-racism movement and the parallel work that's being done on an anti-racism framework. That framework opened for signatories last week, and I hope you look it up if you haven't already through Cooperation Canada's website, cooperation.ca. Arguably, no period in time has offered such an opportunity to understand the complex intersections of privilege and prejudicial practices, which increase the vulnerability of certain groups in our society. As we work in a global system, we can't ignore the role that gender, race, and privilege play in the power dynamics that allow for sexual exploitation and abuse to occur. How all too often it's the white man from the north who abuses his position of power against those who are supposed to be benefiting from his work, not victimized. Our systems are nowhere near generating the equal protection that we should all expect, regardless of individual circumstances. Building on the mobilizations of Me Too, of Black Lives Matter, and the essential momentum it has generated for equality everywhere, the moment we're living now needs to translate into tangible change and progress in fighting all forms of oppression as they intersect with one another. We can only do this by examining closely the power structures that surround us and that we're a part of. Tout le monde ici aujourd'hui, sans exception, a un rôle à jouer pour empêcher et contrer l'inconduite sexuelle dans notre secteur. À la fois les inconduites qui ciblent les communautés où nous travaillons et celles subies par nos collègues. Before we begin, I ask that we take a moment to watch a short video that powerfully exemplifies why we're here speaking about the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse today. Again, I remind you that you need to do what you need to be safe, and this video does contain anonymized quotes from survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse. If you don't want to watch this video, just so you know, it'll be 3 minutes and 30 seconds long, and so you can take the time that you need and to return accordingly. And so we'll turn to this video now.
Have taken care of me. Instead, you abandoned me.
In this community, no one can access corn soya blend without having sex first.
The girls are orphans. They don't have a mother or a father. If they think the abuse can help them, they will go and try to do these things to get food.
I leave my child with my little sister, who is 10 years old. And I dress good, and I go where the angels workers drink or live. And one of them will ask me for sex. Sometimes they give me things like food, oil, soap, and I will sell them and get money.
Aid workers have so much power that people treat them as really important, and the community cannot challenge them.
If something happens, you should report it. But in addition to this, there must be action taken. The organization should dismiss the person so that other men will learn that you cannot go around abusing children in this way. Often no action is taken, and that is the problem.
When Ma asked me to go to the stream to wash plates, a peacekeeper asked me to take my clothes off so that he can take a picture. When I asked him to give me money, he told me, no money for children, only biscuits.
I told them what the soldier did to me, but they never told me what happened to him. Until I know what happened to him, I will never have peace.
I've had a man try to lock me in his office to rape me so I could get a UN job.
One of the guys pulls down my t-shirt to reveal my breasts. I was so shocked, I didn't know what to say. So I made a joke saying this was something I should report to HR. He was HR.
Investigation teams are made up of police and lawyers who are more interested in legal definitions than in the survivor. Women are not believed, and that goes to the heart of it all.
Sexual harassment and assault was supposedly forbidden in their code of conduct. When the incident was reported, their only concern was their reputation, and they wanted to make sure I would not speak out.
Well, if we needed any kind of reminder of how important this topic is, that certainly helped. It's been almost 3 years since the process began in Canada of drafting the Leaders' Pledge to prevent and address sexual misconduct. We began that work in 2018. By signing the pledge, sector leaders have committed to set a concrete set of actions to prevent and respond to sexual misconduct in our sector. This includes, among other measures, establishing a culture of zero tolerance to all forms of sexual misconduct in all the work that we do. It also includes strengthening existing organizational policies and practices to prevent and address sexual misconduct, supporting survivors of sexual misconduct, and ensuring that all allegations are investigated and that perpetrators are held to account. Cette promesse d'engagement a été signée par plus de 100 organisations, de toute taille et aux mandats divers, des organisations d'aide au développement et des organisations humanitaires, des organisations de différentes structures, capacités, mandats et organisations programmatiques. The pledge is ambitious, it's also achievable, and most importantly, it's necessary. But what next? Today's theme is broadly from a pledge to a plan. We have the pledge, and now we need to walk the talk. That's where Digna comes in. We'll hear more from Aislinn, our Digna program manager, on how Digna supports building the capacity of Canadian international development and humanitarian organizations to develop and implement PSCA measures. Digna is implemented by Cooperation Canada with the support of Global Affairs Canada as the national, we're doing this in our function as the national umbrella organization for Canada's international development and humanitarian organizations. But both Cooperation Canada members and also non-members beyond in the sector are offered access to these resources and services to respond to specific PSCA capacity gaps. For our part at Cooperation Canada, we're committed to continuing our engagement on this issue and to doing what we can to support the sector as we work together to deliver on both the letter and the spirit of this pledge. Action to prevent and address sexual misconduct is essential in its own right. It's also an essential part of a feminist approach to the work that we do. So let's hear from the leaders who are doing the important work of putting the plan into action. And so allow me now to introduce Aislinn. Aislinn Rowe is the Digna program manager. Over to you, Aislinn.
Thanks, Nick. Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Aislinn Rowe et je suis la gestionnaire du programme Digna. J'ai le plaisir de vous présenter la première conférence sur la prévention de l'exploitation et les abus sexuels, PEAS. Comme Nick a dit, on va utiliser cet acronyme beaucoup, donc c'est ça que ça veut dire. Donc, certains d'entre vous étaient déjà inscrits à l'événement original en mars 2020, qui n'a pas eu lieu. Donc, malgré que l'événement original n'ait pas eu lieu l'an dernier, en le convertissant entièrement en ligne, nous avons l'opportunité d'accueillir des participants de partout au Canada, quelque chose que nous n'aurions pas pu faire avant. So, while we have tried to integrate as many in-person elements to this event, it still remains virtual and is highly dependent on people being comfortable with the technology. You should have all received the participant guide in your emails this morning, and we'll put it again in the chat right now. The details are there, but we'll quickly go over it. So you should already have your translation on if you don't need it, but if not, take the time now to select your language of choice. And I recommend muting the original audio so you have a better listening experience. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A box. So in the plenary session, we have the Q&A function and the chat box. Let's reserve the chat box for if you have any technical issues. We'll be happy to assist you. If you can't hear us, let us know. But if you have any questions for the presenters, we may not have time to get to them all, but please put them in the Q&A box so we know what we need to ask in future events or in follow-up. Following the opening panel, we have simultaneous breakout rooms. And because Zoom breakout rooms don't allow for interpretation, we actually have provided you with a link for each of those separate breakout rooms. And we'll provide you with those again when the time comes. And finally, there's a note on the code of conduct for our event. As we discuss the importance of a strong code of conduct in the context of our organizations and PSCA, we also have one for Digna's events. So please adhere to the values of respect, inclusion, equity, humility, safety, and solidarity. And I'll actually give you the chance now to sign off on this. So please take the time now to agree to this code of conduct and if you choose not to, we will ask you to please excuse yourselves, but I don't think that will be the case. And so we'll put the agenda up on the screen now. Noelia, there we go. All right, so our first panel is the following speakers, and I'll let Munya introduce them in a second. And as you can, after this panel, I will be going more into depth about Digna, following this excellent lineup. So I will take the time now to introduce our session facilitator and co-chair of the Digna Advisory Committee, Munya Shadi. Munya est coordinatrice du Comité québécois Femmes et Développement de la COSI. Et je la passe la parole. Merci, Munya.
Est-ce que je prends la parole?
Oui, merci.
OK. D'accord. Bonjour. J'ai le plaisir de co-présider Digna qui organise cet important événement. Dans le partenariat avec Digna, je représente le Comité québécois Femmes et Développement, CQFD de la COSI, dont plus de 60 organismes sont actifs dans la coopération internationale. Le CQFD de la COSI s'appuie sur une approche féministe centrée sur la personne survivante en tant qu'experte de sa propre vie en matière de prévention et de lutte contre les abus et l'exploitation sexuelle. Nous commençons cet événement sous le thème « Faire face à l'impensable, prévenir et combattre l'exploitation et les abus sexuels ». Pour réfléchir à cette question avec les représentantes et représentants des organismes œuvrant à l'international dans les domaines du développement et de l'humanitaire, sont présentes et présents avec nous aujourd'hui des invités de taille, de par leur rôle politique, de par leur expertise. Alors, en animant cette première séance, j'aurai donc le plaisir de mettre à profit la présence parmi nous de Madame Karina Gould, ministre du Développement international, de Madame Kate Higgins, directrice exécutive intérimaire d'Oxfam Canada, et de Monsieur Gareth Price-Jones du comité directeur pour la réponse humanitaire. Madame la ministre, Madame, Monsieur, tout en vous disant le plaisir de vous avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui, je voudrais cadrer la question principale de cette séance en vous soumettant ceci. Pour prévenir les abus et l'exploitation sexuelle, pour favoriser le signalement par les survivantes et les accompagner efficacement, il est primordial de prendre en considération que le terrain de la coopération internationale est par excellence un terrain de complexité de rapports de pouvoir à dimensions multiples, car il s'agit d'appréhender les interactions entre le personnel des OCI, les partenaires locaux qui sont souvent des ONG et les communautés locales ciblées par les programmes. C'est tout ce monde-là qui est dans un contexte de travail, en interaction, dans des rapports de hiérarchie, générant des rapports de pouvoir, rapports se déroulant entre nord-nord, nord-sud et sud-sud. Donc, cela contextualise les violences sexuelles dans des systèmes d'oppression croisés que l'on nomme sexisme, colonialisme, racisme. Cela m'amène à préciser que sous l'angle de l'intersectionnalité, les femmes et les filles sont les plus vulnérabilisées par ces rapports de pouvoir. Donc, tout en soulignant l'importance de mettre en place des mécanismes de rapatriement des survivantes canadiennes de manière à mieux les accompagner, nous devons ne pas oublier que le maillon le plus faible de cette chaîne sont les survivantes non canadiennes, qui font souvent face dans leur pays à une culture qui peut plus ou moins justifier ou tolérer les abus et violences et qui font face à d'importantes insuffisances dans le système juridique et dans les mécanismes d'accompagnement des survivantes. Ce que je veux dire par là, c'est que pour qu'elle soit efficace, la prévention devrait être un continuum. Parce que parmi les ONG du Sud, il existe des ressources et compétences sensibilisées et importantes, et donc qui ont une maîtrise de la thématique de la lutte contre les violences sexuelles. Le continuum voudrait dire, par exemple, une longue chaîne de formation des formatrices et formateurs en partenariat avec les ONG du Sud dans un esprit de partage réciproque des savoirs et d'adaptation aux spécificités du pays concerné, et cela de façon à ce que les communautés locales soient incluses dans le processus de la prévention. Sans inclure les partenaires et les communautés locales, le processus de la prévention reste manquant et inefficace à mon avis. Voilà, donc en cadrant de cette façon ma réflexion par rapport à cette séance-là que j'anime, je commence par m'adresser à Madame la ministre du Développement international, Karina Gould. Madame la ministre, pour poser ma question sur une note positive, je voudrais rappeler que nous avons déjà pour acquis que le Canada a adopté la déclaration de Whistler sur la protection contre l'exploitation sexuelle et le mauvais traitement dans le domaine de l'aide internationale, et que aussi Affaires mondiales Canada conditionne depuis 2019 le financement des OCI par l'exigence d'être doté d'un code de conduite en la matière. Donc, nous partons déjà de ce cadre-là comme acquis. Il en découle évidemment la tolérance zéro et les codes de conduite qui nous font partir sur de bonnes bases. Mais je voudrais savoir dans quelle mesure vos politiques à ce propos intègrent-elles une approche féministe prenant en compte l'intersectionnalité des vulnérabilités des survivantes, et aussi je voudrais savoir ce qu'il en est de l'accompagnement en termes de budget pour que votre vision et votre politique puissent se concrétiser. Merci.
Oh, mais merci beaucoup, Mounia, pour cette introduction et aussi pour encadrer cet enjeu d'une manière très, très compréhensive. C'est bien sûr un enjeu très important et quelque chose que le Canada prend tellement au sérieux. So I'm very happy to be able to join you to mark the launch of Digna today. As Minister of International Development, I'm committed to Canada's feminist international assistance policy. And fundamental to this policy is the empowerment of women and girls. Women's safety must be the foundation on which all progress is built. And what we are talking about today, sexual exploitation and abuse, undermines our efforts to address gender inequalities. It must be addressed and called out. Because as long as sexual exploitation and abuse remains hidden in the shadows, it will persist and thrive. That's why it is devastating when incidents of sexual exploitation and abuse come to light in humanitarian and development sectors. This goes against everything that everyone gathered here today is working towards. Recent reporting by the New Humanitarian has shone a spotlight on more than 50 women who have alleged sexual exploitation and abuse by aid workers involved in the Congo Ebola response. They refer to it as an open secret. This is unacceptable. Every time a story goes along with the wire, it diminishes the public trust in what we are doing. Worst of all, it leaves devastating scars on survivors and their families and destroys the trust of the very people we have the privilege of trying to help. So we must be diligent in preventing sexual exploitation and abuse before it even happens. This includes robust measures that keep bad actors out and that hold our teams, local partners, and other stakeholders to the highest standards. It includes making sure that beneficiaries are aware of safeguarding measures and know that Canada has zero tolerance for sexual exploitation and abuse. It includes ensuring that survivors know how to report and that investigations put them at the center and prioritize their rights and needs. and it includes holding bad actors to account. No organization, no matter what the sector, can be complacent about this, and ignorance can never be an excuse. Canada's commitment to preventing and addressing sexual exploitation and abuse remains steadfast in the midst of a global health crisis, because we know that COVID-19 poses a greater risk for women and girls. Safe spaces are gone, services are taken away, and they are left more vulnerable to sexual exploitation and abuse. The extreme power imbalances characteristic of development settings becomes more pronounced in humanitarian crises. We have heard stories of women reporting sexual exploitation over aid they were already entitled to. Our prevention efforts need to evolve and continuously deepen to address the root causes of abuse. That is why it is so crucial that Canada's international assistance supports transformative humanitarian action. COVID-19 has revealed more clearly the need for matured engagement with local partners in order to respectfully contribute to the strengths and expertise they already have. Going forward, there are three crucial elements of Canada's action I would like to highlight. The first is Canada's role on the world stage. We are an active member of the global community focusing on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse and international assistance. As Munya mentioned some of them, and I won't list all of them, but they range from the G7 Whistler Declaration to the OECD Tidewater Statement to Prime Minister Trudeau's participation in the Circle of Leadership on the prevention of and response to sexual abuse in UN operations. Our commitment to the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse on multilateral platforms is very clear. The second element is our philosophy of focusing on international development with a feminist approach. We seek to amplify the voices of the poorest and most marginalized, especially women and girls in all of their diversity. On the ground, this means we partner with initiatives that address unequal power relations, build resilience, and empower women and girls with access to resources, decision-making power, and the benefits of development efforts. With all the chaos that 2020 brought us, it also highlighted the need for transformation. We must transform for the better the power dynamics and enabling culture that have been embedded in the international development and humanitarian sector. As journalist Shaista Aziz says, misogyny, racism, sexism, sexual exploitation, and abuse are about power. Part of the solution lies in empowerment, diversity, and inclusion, and amplifying the voices of those we aim to help, especially those who are most vulnerable. More importantly, though, it also lies in international assistance being delivered in ways that prevent, mitigate, and ultimately reduce the power imbalances that give rise to sexual exploitation and abuse. The third and probably most important element of our Canadian approach is that we take our commitment to accountability very seriously. Since 2018, Global Affairs Canada has clarified, repeatedly communicated, and progressively formalized its expectations of partners when it comes to the prevention and response to sexual exploitation and abuse. We expect partners to have appropriate, holistic, and robust measures in place to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse from occurring in the first place. This includes publicly available codes of conduct that address sexual exploitation and abuse, high standards for vetting staff, training, and disciplinary measures as needed. We require anonymous and confidential reporting mechanisms that protect survivors and whistleblowers. We expect to be notified within 48 hours of a partner receiving a credible allegation using the established incident reporting channels, and annual reporting to the public on case numbers. Partnership is built on trust. This includes trusting our partners to respond to allegations, keeping survivors at the center. So when sexual abuse and exploitation is uncovered, I know you will think of the survivors first and foremost, and not delay or be misguided by concerns over other interests like your organization's reputation. Because we really do have zero tolerance for inaction when it comes to sexual exploitation and abuse. Though distressing that instances of sexual exploitation and abuse in international assistance continue to be brought to light, the fact that cases are being reported may be a sign of positive change. We hope it means victims have more information and knowledge to report an incident, and that organizations have both the process and commitment to act. But underreporting of cases persists and remains a concern. So let me be clear. Compliance is non-negotiable when it comes to preventing and responding to sexual exploitation and abuse. Collectively, we must continuously address the root causes of sexual exploitation and abuse, along with other human rights violations, namely power imbalances and inequality. All of the elements I have outlined combine to cement Canada's determination to prevent and respond to sexual exploitation and abuse in the delivery of international assistance. Many of them depend on you, our partners, to ensure robust safeguarding for the ultimate beneficiaries of international assistance through diligence all along the aid delivery chain. That is why it is so important to celebrate today the formal launch of Digna. Global Affairs Canada partnered with Cooperation Canada in July 2019 to establish Digna to serve all sector partners, regardless of membership with Cooperation Canada. And we hope that you all actively engage, both as clients and as stakeholders of Digna. We trust that the training, tools, resources, and advice will help close capacity gaps, meet donor expectations, and contribute to increased accountability in the sector. Thank you.
Ah, je m'excuse, ce n'était pas allumé. Donc, merci Madame la Ministre. C'était éclairant et je voudrais partir d'un chiffre. Moi, j'ai retenu qu'on a répertorié 50 cas de femmes abusées. Je voudrais partir de ce chiffre-là pour m'adresser à Madame Kate Higgins, directrice exécutive intérimaire d'Oxfam Canada. Et on nous annonce ces cas-là, mais nous le savons. Il est connu que presque 70% des survivantes ne dénoncent pas la violence qu'elles ont subie. Les causes identifiées du non-signalement peuvent se résumer en 3 types de peur. Peur vis-à-vis de l'employeur et ou de l'agresseur, peur de la stigmatisation sociale, peur de l'inefficacité du système. Donc, il faudrait s'attaquer à ces peurs qui ont des raisons objectives d'exister, raisons qui sont reliées au rapport de pouvoir en place. D'où ma question à Madame Kate Higgins. Je voudrais savoir où en sont les cultures et les mesures organisationnelles mises en place par les organisations telles que Oxfam pour favoriser davantage la prévention et pour favoriser davantage de signalement. Parce que sans signalement, la suite des choses ne peut pas se faire.
Well, thank you so much, Munia and Minister Gould and Cooperation Canada for the opportunity to be here with you all this afternoon. And thank you for the question. I mean, I think as has been discussed already, the last few years has been a real reckoning for those of us who are committed to the work of the humanitarian aid and development sector. And I think we've been forced to grapple with the fact that people who gave us their support, their trust, and who needed our support have been exploited by those who have power and control. And while this has been a reckoning for the whole sector, I think it's fair to say that Oxfam was on the pointy end of this in 2018. And we have been working very hard as an organization since that point to really ensure that we can be a safer organization for those who work with us and those that we work for. So let me just take a few minutes this afternoon to talk through some of the action that we've taken as an organization, and I hope some constructive or useful reflections on how we're taking this work forward. But before I do that, I just want to re-emphasize something that everyone who has spoken so far has talked about, which is that I think it's absolutely crucial for us to understand that this issue of sexual violence, sexual abuse, sexual misconduct cannot be solved with simply technical fixes. At its very core is power imbalance, is privilege, and I think we really need to ensure that that is absolutely central to the way that we work to prevent and then respond to sexual exploitation and abuse. We need to look at ourselves, we need to look at our organizations, we need to look at our organizational culture and understand why there are cultures that mean that people, most often women, are vulnerable. And I think this is messier work, this is more uncomfortable work, but it is absolutely critical if we want to prevent and address sexual exploitation and abuse. So in 2018 at Oxfam, we appointed an independent commission on sexual misconduct, accountability, and culture change as a global confederation. And I think even inherent in that name, sexual misconduct, accountability, and culture change, we realized as an organization that if we were going to address these deep cracks in our system and come out of this a better and safer organization, we needed to think about the technical challenges that we were facing, but more importantly, the organizational culture changes that we needed to embark on. This independent commission was independent. It comprised independent women's rights and human rights experts. And we really felt we needed an independent commission who took an external look at the changes that we needed to make. So let me share with you just 5 groups of actions or groups of changes that we have embarked on as an organization. We have made some progress. There's still a lot of work to do, but I hope the way I share this progress with you is useful for those of you who are on this journey in your organizations. So the first is around policies and practices. It was clear to us that there were a range of policies that needed to be updated, that needed to be changed. So we now have, as an organization, policies on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. We have a child safeguarding policy, a digital safeguarding policy, a youth safeguarding policy. And so there was a lot of work done across the Oxfam Confederation to update these policies to ensure that they were really protecting the people who work with us and the people that we work for. But very quickly, we realized that we can have all the best policies in the world, and what is really important is how they're implemented and the transition to practice. And so what we have done at Oxfam is come up with core standards on the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. This brings together all of the expectations that are covered in a number of these policies, all of the expectations that we have for our programs and for our staff. So that covers everything from planning and budgets to staff training, to staff capacity, to recruitment and screening to ensure that we're being very careful about the people that we're recruiting, to taking a very survivor-centered approach to reporting and responding to PSEA, and to working with our partners to ensure they understand the expectations that we have, and that we're supporting our partners in their journey to be better and safer organizations. The second thing that we have done that has been very important is that we have really upped our game on data around PSEA, reporting on that data, and on case management. So last year, we launched a new global case management system. What this system does is acts as a centralized system for the global Oxfam Confederation on data, on open cases, closed cases, on instances of sexual harassment, bullying, exploitation, and abuse. And we publish this data every 6 months. So this has been very important for us in terms of demonstrating our accountability, but also to identifying trends in what is happening. Thirdly, we've prioritized and resourced staff capacity, training, leadership. PSEA training is mandatory for all Oxfam staff. We have PSEA experts across the Global Confederation with a special focus in humanitarian contexts. We have every country where there's an Oxfam office, we have a PSEA focal point. So training and capacity of staff has been very important. But I must emphasize it goes beyond this. Leaders really need to step up and show leadership around this issue. So for us at Oxfam Canada, the executive director takes a very active role and a very active interest in our work on PSEA. Fourthly, around programming and learning, Oxfam has implemented a safe programming strategy and framework. So this is ensuring that our humanitarian and development work very much takes a do no harm approach. It's interesting, others have been reflecting on COVID, and we've been doing some really important work about ensuring that in the COVID context, where so many of us are working virtually, training around PSEA, support for staff around PSEA, thinking through our humanitarian response to COVID from a PSEA perspective is really prioritized. And finally, organizational culture and organizational culture change is absolutely central to addressing and preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. At Oxfam Canada and across the global Oxfam Confederation, we very much are guided by feminist principles that we have co-designed as a team. We have had several conversations around privilege, around power, around organizational culture change across the organization. We've had conversations with our board of directors, with our supporters around the actions that we're taking to be a better and safer organization. And I think being transparent around the challenges that we face, but also the progress that we're making with our board, with our supporters, with our staff has been absolutely critical. Let me just end with three broad reflections about what at least I have really learnt over the last few years working closely on this issue. The first is I really feel that we need to go beyond a compliance-based approach on PSEA to a culture of accountability. And in order to have accountability, we have to have trust. So that means we need to be providing survivor-centered support. We need to be publishing data on cases of PSEA. We need to be demonstrating the steps that we're taking to address PSEA in our organization. So that culture of accountability is absolutely key. Minister Gould and Munia both referred to challenges that we still face, and we certainly have continued to face at Oxfam, around reporting. We know that sexual exploitation and abuse is underreported. We know that it's underreported, including by our own staff and our partners. They have legitimate concerns about losing funding, about losing their jobs. So we really need to assure staff, assure partners that sexual exploitation and abuse will happen. It is extremely unfortunate, but cases will continue, and we need to ensure that it's reported so that we can understand and act immediately in a survivor-centered way. This is absolutely important and something that we really need to continue to emphasize to ensure that people feel supported, to stand up, to come forward, and to make a report where they see concerns and where they have concerns, or where as a survivor they have experienced something. The final point I want to make before closing is that I think PSEA has really been viewed from a gender lens. And this has been critical because we know that women bear the brunt of sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and sexual abuse. But moving forward, we really need to take an intersectional approach that considers race, that considers class, religion, disability, power dynamics in our organization and in our programming. So I really hope that moving forward, us at Oxfam, but also us working together as a sector, can really embed an intersectional approach to our work on PSEA. We need to grapple with colonial practices. We need to grapple with racism and privilege in our sector and in our work. And so I hope that this can be a challenge that we embrace and move forward with, because I think it will be absolutely critical for this work moving forward. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be part of this relaunch of Digna, and I'll hand it back to you, Munia.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Madame Kate Higgins. Je retiens vraiment une pratique vraiment intéressante qui est vraiment à transmettre et à communiquer. C'est l'idée que vous avez centré les données et la gestion des cas au niveau mondial du réseau d'Oxfam. Je trouve ça très, très intéressant comme pratique. Et donc, maintenant, nous passons de la coopération internationale au secteur humanitaire. Et donc, je m'adresse à Monsieur Gareth Price-Jones du comité directeur pour la réponse humanitaire pour lui demander comment la conversation a-t-elle jusqu'ici évolué autour de la LEFP au niveau mondial et comment les organisations canadiennes peuvent-elles s'assurer qu'elles suivent les toutes dernières lignes directrices et les derniers cadres sur le terrain.
Thanks, Munia. Yeah, so this is an issue we've been working on in the sector for many years. Particularly attention grew after the scandals in West Africa back in 2002. And during this period, there was a reluctant willingness to address the issues when unavoidable, but also a high level of denial amongst the aid community, with a sense that humanitarians were very much heroes and heroines, and thus couldn't be associated with such exploitative behaviour. This also meant that we saw widespread panic amongst managers when cases did come to light. So they hadn't discussed them, they hadn't prepared for them, and expectations weren't clear. Investigative capacity was weak, and codes of conduct and management support were largely non-existent. And in particular, there was a huge fear of being sued by abusers if you sacked them or shared any information on their wrongdoing with staff or external actors in particular, such as donors or other employers. And I had personal experience of this as a deputy country director. I fired one of my own staff, and then he got a written apology from my HQ after threatening to go to the media about poor HR practices. So the default response in that time was very much reactive. You timed out contracts, you shuffled staff around, and too often it was to promote abusers to locations where they were seen to present less of a risk. As we moved on to the late 2000s, to address challenges around investigation and action, agencies made a concerted effort to introduce codes of conduct and to shift the emphasis away from proving misconduct, which is often extremely hard, to proving a breach of code of conduct. And there was a much greater awareness within the sector that abuse was happening, but it still remained very much unspoken and certainly not something you'd ever put in writing. Many organizations began to hold informal no-hire lists, where they were saying clearly that that you wouldn't share information. This period really set clear expectations for staff and managers, particularly around, for example, criminal exploitation, such as consensual but exploitative relationships, the use of sex workers. And interestingly, the 2011 Haiti case in Oxfam also accelerated these efforts. Now, we come to the current period where in 2018, the coverage and the attention linked also to Me Too and wider social acceptance of exploitative relationships in places like Hollywood and elsewhere. We saw two main shifts. Firstly, there was an understanding that abuse was happening and was as widespread as in other professions. So that public view of aid workers as heroes working selflessly for their fellows was shattered, as it previously had been for groups such as youth leaders and faith leaders. Secondly, it really threw into sharp relief the dangers of a risk calculation that prioritised the legal risk of proactive action over the risks of not taking such action at all. But it was interesting, for the first 6 months after the issue hit the headline, the focus was very much around addressing risk at the agency level. So agencies hired safeguarding staff, they stepped up their procedures. As we've just heard from Kate, a lot of investment in investigative capacity and, for example, reviewing complaints mechanisms and codes of conduct. Following the October 2018 Safeguarding Summit, collectively we began as a sector, as the humanitarian sector, to catch up with those who insisted that this wasn't enough. And we began to improve collective thinking about what a survivor-centered approach really looks like. So particularly focused around collective protection of staff and affected people. And this is what Kate was referring to as building a culture of safeguarding, a safe programming approach. And a key point to remember here is that from a survivor perspective, an agency-based complaint mechanism that just covers the staff of a particular NGO or donor or UN agency is of limited use. A survivor likely doesn't know if the individual who abused you works for the government, for a UN agency, for an INGO or a local implementing partner. They likely don't know if they're a staff or a volunteer, and critically, they probably don't much care. What's important is the power those individuals hold and the power they're abusing. Likewise, there's an inherent injustice about agency-based restitution and support. Many agencies, local NGOs, others, don't have the capacity to provide medical, psychosocial and legal support. So what we need is collective efforts and referral systems that work across multiple agencies, across the whole of a humanitarian response. Progress has been made on national PSA networks, including engagement with government and donor-funded interagency PSA coordinators. We're still struggling both for consistent funding for these posts and also to recruit and retain the right skills. These are really tough jobs. They're by their very nature draining jobs with a particular impact on their incumbents. And there's also a heavily gendered element here. So most of the post holders in safeguarding roles remain women, often with the background in gender work. So there's obviously a really kind of personal kind of commitment there, but also a personal impact as well. We've also, over the last few years, recognise the fact that abusers are mobile. They move between countries, they move between agencies. So it's no good one really well-resourced agency having really robust safeguarding for their staff and their programmes if abusers move to other agencies, to volunteer posts. And this has driven work on initiatives like the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme, which we at SCHR operate, as well as initiatives like the Aid Worker Registration Scheme and Interpol's Project Soteria, which works on international police checks. Collective resources are now numerous. So in a mapping we recently completed last year, we identified 56 individual initiatives and at least 25 interagency forums working on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. However, we still struggle with the fact that accountability and decision-making lies within individual organisations. So solutions require strong information sharing, high trust and constant communication, which is difficult with obvious protection, justice and safety issues. How much information is it safe to share without endangering, for example, accused abusers or survivors themselves? And then, since the recent cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're also just beginning to see an additional shift taking hold. And this links to what the Minister and what Kate said earlier, responding to the need to be nuanced about the difference between a generalized awareness that abuse is happening and specific actionable information, which relies on brave survivors trusting systems, agencies, and ultimately individual managers to keep them safe and prioritize them. So that's giving rise to two additional trends. recognizing that it's always going to be really, really hard for survivors to make complaints, to report, to follow those through. One is a focus on whistleblowers, our own staff, who we know are much more likely to share the actionable information that lets us identify and take action against abusers. Our record on this remains weak, so few whistleblowers believe they get the trust and the support they need, and indeed the majority of them still feel they get the opposite. The other big emerging trends recognizes that even with the best complaints mechanisms and the most trustworthy investigators and managers, complaints are going to emerge in only the most egregious cases, given the power and the gender dynamics around abuse in the context we work in. Often we focus on countries like DR Congo, but in fact it's even harder in countries like Yemen and Afghanistan. And indeed, when countries such as Sweden and Norway fail to investigate and address most harassment and abuse, it's unrealistic to think we'll pick up more than a tiny minority in places such as Afghanistan and the Central African Republic. Instead, we're increasingly recognizing that we need to move away from a response that relies on actionable information to a much broader focus on culture and safe programming, making it much less likely that abuse will happen in the first place, and when it does, that multiple people will be aware of it and will report it. The key thing here is moving away from a reliance on individual survivors reporting abuse to a much more proactive, safe programming response of the kind that Kate just talked to us about, which is a primary focus, recognizes and addresses abuse without the need for specific allegations. So it's around our assumption shifting from this doesn't happen or it happens very rarely to actually we need to assume this is happening and act accordingly. It's early days, and we have much more to do around including local organisations more systematically and also engaging with governments. But the change in approach and the progress has been significant over both the last 20 years and the last 3 years since we had those allegations in early 2018. Keeping up with it all is a challenge, but there are tools available that are accessible to all. And I think that Digna will be a key gateway for Canadian organisations to connect with the ones that are most appropriate to your work and to the risks you identify. Thanks.
Merci, Monsieur Gareth Price-Jones. Donc, c'est vraiment intéressant parce que les trois interventions vont dans une logique commune et c'est intéressant de voir que même avec que les organismes leur analyse rejoint aussi Madame la ministre quant à des aspects centraux tels que l'idée de mettre les rapports de pouvoir, le sexisme au centre de la problématique des abus et de l'exploitation sexuelle, tel que mettre au centre le souci des survivantes et de mettre les politiques centrées sur les intérêts des survivantes. Donc, il y a une vision commune vraiment à retenir de l'intervention de Madame Kate d'Oxfam, l'idée de la commission indépendante qui a été créée dès 2018, l'idée d'insister sur des processus qui permettent de faire la transition de la parole à l'acte, et ce à travers des normes centraux qui résument les attentes, les programmes, le travail pour la formation et la conscientisation du personnel. Et donc aussi cette idée ou ce projet qui s'est concrétisé de centraliser les données et d'en faire et de faire le suivi et la gestion des cas au niveau de tout le réseau Oxfam et puis la réflexion qu'elle a résumée en 3 points que sont l'imputabilité, s'assurer que les rapports que les dénonciations ou les rapports soient faits dans l'esprit d'une approche centrée sur la survivante. Et puis, il y a l'idée que le PAS devrait se faire un peu plus sous une approche intersectionnelle. Dans le secteur de l'humanitaire à l'international, on voit aussi qu'il y a peu de dénonciations et que les plaintes n'apparaissent que dans les cas les plus flagrants, étant donné aussi les dynamiques de pouvoir qui sont en place. Et donc, il apparaît l'idée que ce serait intéressant tout en poursuivant l'attente qu'il y ait les dénonciations et les plaintes, de travailler dans un esprit global sur les formations et sur les préventions des abus. Et il y a aussi le souci d'inclure les organismes locaux de manière plus systématique et de collaborer avec les acteurs qui sont en place dans les pays concernés. Donc voilà, c'est autour de ces points-là que s'est déroulée cette séance. Et donc, je cède la parole à mes collègues de Digna dans la perspective de cerner davantage la problématique et d'aller dans les détails. Et je pense que les discussions vont nous amener de plus en plus vers ce qui se passe sur le terrain. Merci.
Thank you very much, Munia. Thank you to all our speakers for guiding us through this discussion. My name is Noelia Ruiz, and I'm the program assistant for Digna. Now we will speak to what role Digna can play in supporting organizations to tackle these questions. Please watch this short video on Digna. One second, please.
Thanks so much, Noelia, for creating that video and for taking us to the next session. So as a reminder, my name is Aislinn Rowe, Digna Program Manager based at Cooperation Canada. And as that quick video illustrates, Cooperation Canada hosts Digna and is funded by Global Affairs Canada. So we thank Global Affairs for all their contributions today and throughout the project as well. And I just want to take a moment to recognize all the questions that are coming in the Q&A function, and I really appreciate them, and we will get to them at some point. Just in the interest of time, we'll move on for now, but don't worry, we will reach out to you in terms of answering those questions. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen in a second. I'm just seeing a chat that people can't hear, so I just want to make sure we're all okay in terms of hearing. Okay, so the title of this section is Digna, What's in a Name? And if you've been on our website, hopefully you found the answer. But the word Digna is Latin for worthy. And so Digna aims to support Canadian organizations and the sector as a whole to be worthy of the trust placed in them by Canadian citizens, by our government, and by the people around the world who put their trust in our organizations. If you can't hear me, maybe you'll have to play with your translation settings. If you had it to English and have your audio muted, maybe that's why you can't hear me. So what is our mission? Our mission is big. Digna aims to contribute to that organizational culture change that everyone talked about in the opening statements. How do we do that? By promoting gender responsive best practices through training, online resources, and a community of practice that we'll talk about later. But I just want to focus on the ultimate goal, which is preventing sexual exploitation and abuse in operations and partnerships. And so that's where we rely on you, the Canadian organizations that we will interact with most, to bring those resources and lessons learned and best practices to everything that you do globally, whether that's with your own staff, volunteers, partner organizations, and everything else. We hope to have an inclusive approach. So we'll do our best to adopt an intersectional feminist approach. All the trainings and resources and support will be informed by these approaches, including human rights and gender equality. And we aim to improve the sector's collective ability to recognize and tackle the power imbalances that everyone mentioned as well. We're going to deliver on our mandate through partnerships with members of the international cooperation sector. And finally, as Gareth mentioned, Digna will play a role in connecting Canadian organizations with global expertise and initiatives. So this includes facilitating learning opportunities with and by global partners and connecting you to the international experts where possible. Sorry, I'll go back. But what does that look like in practice? So this means sector participation and leadership in all that we do. An advisory committee and working groups have been established to provide strategic direction and sector inputs to our work, with approximately 40 individuals who contribute their time and expertise to Digna. A big thank you to them, most of whom are on this call today. So Digna is here to convene, foster collaboration, and enable civil society actors to get the information you need to do the best that you can to prevent SEA, sexual exploitation and abuse, and to respond in the best way possible. So this also means recognizing that our team or any one organization or individual doesn't have all the answers. It means working with all the stakeholders to find the best way forward and recognizing where we can learn from others' successes and challenges. What matters is how we approach this work, ensuring that we're all taking an intersectional approach to recognizing which populations require specific considerations when we're talking about protection. It means examining what kinds of processes lead to the most appropriate and functional reporting mechanisms for each individual context. It also means reflecting upon how systems within which we work have to change so that power imbalances between donors and organizations, practitioners and program participants, and all the layers of gender, race, class, and other indicators of power and privilege can contribute to the acts of exploitation that have and continue to be perpetuated by the international cooperation sector. So that's a lot of things that we are and will be aspiring to be. There's a couple of things that I want to clarify that Digna is not. So while we recognize that there's a high level of need for support in many areas, the first is that we are not a survivor support organization, center, service. At this point, we can't offer intervention, legal advice, or serve as reporting mechanism on behalf of survivors or Canadian organizations. However, our mandate includes examining the feasibility of establishing certain services in the future. So Digna has a responsibility to identify practical ways to support organizations on everything from developing your code of conduct to conducting an investigation to supporting survivors. And so we'll be hiring a team to examine the best way to put systems in place for a collective response and identify the human and financial resources that are required from Digna and from the Canadian sector as a whole to do this in the long term. Digna has and will continue to produce resources that provide information, and we'll be curating a list of verified resources and professionals that can offer these support services, and that will be published on our website in the coming months. Another point of clarification is that we don't have any authority or mandate to enforce or monitor compliance of organizations' policies and systems for PSCA. One example is if you receive funding from Global Affairs Canada or any other donor, they have their own requirements and enforcement mechanisms. Digna is just here to support you in meeting those requirements. So on that note, we have a short video that outlines Global Affairs requirements and where you can find that information on our website.
Global Affairs Canada has established 2 requirements for organizations that receive funding under Canada's International Development and Humanitarian Assistance Envelope to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. One of the requirements is to develop a code of conduct that explicitly prohibits sexual exploitation and abuse. The second requirement is to report any allegation of sexual exploitation and abuse received linked to a project funded by the Canadian government. Make sure your organization is ready to meet these requirements. Visit our website where you will find all you need.
Thanks, Noelia. I'll just reshare my screen again. And that's not all that's on our website. Noelia has worked tirelessly to create a functional website with resources for all of you to use. And so I'll introduce her next video that shows you how to access those resources on our website.
Welcome to our website. Did you know that we have a resource library with over 100 PSEA resources? This is how you can access them. Go to digna.ca/docs. You will see that we have 10 different categories where you can find what you're searching for. Let's say you're searching for a training on safeguarding. Then you have 2 options. The first is by clicking on Available Training. The titles are in alphabetical order. The other option is to search by title. On the search bar, write Safeguarding. You will see all the documents we have on safeguarding. Training from Bonn, Kaya, Keeping Children Safe. I will choose Kaya. You will find a description of the resources and a button to access it. Click on it, and voila, a new window will open.
Thanks, Noelia. Sorry, just getting back. So, while this is our first official conference, Digna has been active since the fall of 2019. So I'll take this time to also note some of the achievements we've had over the past year and a half, and kind of where we're planning to go will be explored after the breakout sessions. So in the past year, over 200 individuals have received PSEA related training or attended a webinar, and we hope to surpass that in 2021. And I want to recognize that there is a significant appetite for this work within the Canadian sector. So each of our trainings have had waiting lists, and this event has surpassed our expectations with over 230 registrations. And I want to thank you for focusing on this topic despite the many competing priorities and the pandemic that we're all living through. We'll also share later today the results from our baseline survey, where 49 organizations from across Canada provided their insights on the current state of PSEA in the sector. And we will be using that data to establish where Digna's work can be leveraged to better contribute to the risk of SEA. And I recognize there's lots of questions in the chat, and I apologize that we don't have time right now, but I do want to reassure you we will take them all and respond in our follow-up email. But you also have the time now in our breakout sessions to engage in conversations. And so we welcome you now to go to the breakout session of your choice. In terms of logistics, in a moment, we will be sharing how to get there, but please note that 2 of the sessions have specific audiences. So if you're not a head of agency for the one or the staff of a small or medium-sized organizations, which in this case we're defining as organizations with under 30 staff. We encourage everyone else to attend the third, more general breakout session, which will apply to anyone in this audience. So unfortunately, because of the technical limitations of Zoom, we can't offer interpretation if we use the breakout room function. So we have to actually ask you to join a separate Zoom call so that they can be fully bilingual. Not to worry, we're going to provide you the links directly in the chat. So once you click on it, you'll be asked if you want to close this call and join the other. It should be easy. The session leads for each session will provide you with the link to rejoin this plenary session when you're done. And please do join, because we'll have a wrap up where you'll hear about the next steps and how you can benefit from Digna's opportunities. So first, we will get the leaders, the heads of agencies, executive directors, CEOs, to join their breakout session. So we will put the link in the chat there. So all three are in the chat already. So if you are a head of agency, please join the first one, meeting accountabilities and compliance requirements as a leader. Second, we have small and medium-sized organizations. While there are many definitions, as I said, we're wanting only organizations that have 30 staff or less to attend this session. This is co-led by Spur Change, Andréane Martel, who runs Spur Change, which is the program that supports SMOs in Canada. So any level of staff member can attend. So if you are a head of agency and you want to attend that one, please go ahead. The link is in the chat there as well. The title is Small But Mighty, Addressing the Specific Contexts of Small and Medium-Sized Organizations. And then finally, the breakout session that you're all welcome to attend, labeled Experiences in Establishing PSCA Progress and Obstacles. So you'll find those links in the chat now. Everyone can feel free to go ahead to those sessions. I will be joining one, Noelia will be joining another, and Munia will be